Okay, so we are covering the first part of chapter 6 for child development. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so in this chapter, we are talking about the social and emotional development during the first 2 years. So we're going to start first with the emotional states that infants show. So infants in general, they show 3 emotional states. So contentment, which is basically that they're happy, right? So they just had a good meal or something like that. They're happy. Interest, so this is typically when they're exposed to something new, their eyes will get really wide, right? And they'll kind of watch what's going on. And then potentially distress also. So distress, they're upset. So this could be crying, this could be them, whimpering, kind of showing that degree of distress. So infants start to be able to coordinate their emotions with the people around them and using those emotions and also facial expressions that are often connected to emotions to engage other people. So we're going to talk a lot today about emotions, right, and how infants use those. One of the things that is just so exciting, if you've been around little babies, is the emergence of what we call the social smile. So social smile, about 6 to 8 weeks in terms of their developmental age, but this is when an infant will actually smile in response to a specific person. So they recognize you, right? They know who you are, and so they're smiling in response to you. They're happy to see you. It's exciting. All right, so this, I will post the video link for this particular still face procedure, but this is just another example of how infants are using their own facial expressions to potentially coordinate their actions with outside people. So in this case, this is something called the still face procedure. And so what happens in the still face procedure is that the little baby is trying to get mom's attention or whoever the adult is. And so the little baby is kind of doing everything, trying to engage mom. So smiling, laughing, kind of reaching out, right? Like using hand gestures to reach out to mom, and mom is supposed to only respond with a still face. So completely expressionless. So no facial expressions at all in response to the little baby's bids for attention. And so as you will see in the video, what happens eventually is that usually babies get really upset by this. They start to cry. They become very, very distressed because this goes against what they have learned in terms of how to engage people, right? And how to kind of get that social interaction. So they have learned, remember we talked about serve and return, they have learned that if they serve some kind of social bid, so meaning I'm going to smile and then someone's going to return that. Someone is going to smile back at me. Someone is going to respond to me. Someone is going to talk to me. And so when that is violated, that's very, very distressing for infants. All right, so as we move through that first year of life, we'll move this over here. So as we move through that first year of life, we see that there are 3 different aspects that start to emerge in terms of how infants begin to coordinate their goals, so their social goals with other people, okay? So having this kind of shared set of goals. So one of the things that babies will do that you may have seen is that they will oftentimes do things like point, right? They'll point to things, especially when they're learning how to talk. And so they will typically point to something, and by pointing to it, they are telling you, hey, what is that, right? Or like, you look at this also. So they use pointing, they use gesturing to communicate with other people, and they also use it to engage in what we call joint attention. So joint attention is basically conjoined attention, meaning 2 people, baby and you, 2 people who are paying attention to the same thing at the same time. So in this picture that you see here, we have a great example of joint attention. So both baby and mom are paying attention to this sunflower. They are paying attention to exactly the same thing. So that's the beginning, right? Of babies realizing that they have some kind of power to get you to focus, right, on what they want you to pay attention to. They also will start to coordinate their social goals with you by using what we call social referencing. So social referencing is referring to someone else, right? So some kind of social engagement piece by looking to another person, typically an adult, for information on how should I respond in this particular situation. So you may have seen this, especially with, let's say, babies when they're first learning how to walk and they fall down and they turn around, right? And they look at you to see, did you see that? Were you watching that also? Did you see what happened? And they're also looking at you to see, how should I respond? How should I react to what just happened? So if baby falls and then baby looks over at you and you're like, you're okay, just keep going, no problem, you're good, you got this, then the baby's probably going to get back up, right, and start trying to walk again. But if you're like, oh my God, are you okay? Oh, poor baby, oh, then your little baby is probably going to be pretty upset, right? Your baby might start crying. So with social referencing, they're referencing you, right, as the other person, and they're looking to you to get information about, what do I do? How do I respond in this particular situation? All right, so this next one here, and I'll post the video link for this also, but this is a huge development in terms of little babies and their understanding of their sense of self. So I will post the video link to this Rouge test of self-awareness, but essentially we find that around 18 months of age, babies who have a little dot, so that's what you see here, so a little dot that's placed on their forehead, by 18 months of age, when they look in the mirror at themselves with this little dot on the forehead, they will touch their forehead because they realize that the little baby that they see in the reflection is actually them. So that tells us that they have developed a sense of self. So they have developed an understanding that they are autonomous, they are separate from their parents, right? They are a separate being. Babies under 18 months of age, they don't realize that this is them, right? They don't realize that this is themselves reflected in that mirror. And so as you'll see in the video, they do super cute things, like they look behind the mirror to see where that other baby is. Sometimes they'll wave thinking that it's another baby there. So they haven't yet developed that sense of self, and that's huge, as we will see for the development of some particular emotions. All right, so infants, so during the second year, infants are developing what we call self-conscious emotions. So self-conscious emotions require a sense of self, okay? So you have to have an understanding of yourself as an autonomous, separate, independent being before you can develop these self-conscious emotions, because they require an understanding of, how do my own behaviors potentially affect other people? Okay, so I have to have a sense of self before I can really start to understand these self-conscious emotions. So self-conscious emotion 1, empathy, being able to feel what another person feels. A sense of shame. So this is typically regretting aspects about myself. So regretting aspects about kind of who I am as a person. I've done something that's dishonorable for myself, and contrasting that with guilt, which is typically a rejection of a behavior. Okay, so I'm upset with myself for a particular behavior. So maybe I stole something and I'm not happy with myself for doing that. A sense of embarrassment, so that other people are perhaps kind of making fun of me or laughing at me, and a sense of pride that I feel good, right, about something that I have accomplished. So these actually start to emerge around 18 months of age, so you can actually see these things being demonstrated in very, very young infants. During the second year, then, toddlers start to develop what we call emotional regulation, which is essentially their ability to control their own emotions, or at least to start to control their own emotions. So one of the ways that they will control their own emotions, particularly when they are afraid of something, right, or when they're upset by something, one of the ways that toddlers will control those emotions is by talking. So they'll tell an adult, like, I'm scared. So they might kind of verbalize that to you. If it's something that's scary to them, they might do things like look away. Maybe they'll cover their eyes so that they don't have to see something that's scary for them. They will use some kind of favorite object to provide some kind of comfort. So not uncommon at all for children to have like a favorite toy, right? Or a stuffed animal or a blanket that provides security for them. And then they may also just potentially use language to let you know that they are very scared, right? Or that they're very frightened. All right, so we're going to talk next about what's called temperament. Okay, so temperament. So when we talk about temperament, we're referring to individual variations in a child's kind of characteristic way of relating to the world around them. We typically think of temperament as the foundation of adult personality. We assume that temperament is innate, meaning you're born with this. So if you've been around little babies, you have probably noticed, oh my goodness, they are not all the same. They are very, very different from one another. And so we would classify those early differences as differences in temperament. So temperament, the first researchers to really study this are Thomas and Chess. And so Thomas and Chess came up with the specific categories that you see demonstrated here of easy, difficult, and slow to warm. So different categories of temperament. So babies who are easy babies, they are generally pretty cheerful babies. They're adaptable. It doesn't really take them a long time to get adjusted to a new kind of routine. They have regular sleep and wake cycles, and they eat on a regular basis also. So most babies fall into this easy category. Children who are difficult, so this is about 10% of children, they have fairly intense negative reactions to new things. So they don't like change, they do not like new things. It takes them a long time to adapt when there is some kind of change in routine, and they have a very sporadic or irregular daily cycle. So meaning their feeding schedules, their eating schedules, their sleeping schedules, they are not consistent from day to day. And then in the middle are what we call slow to warm children. So slow to warm children, a little bit less active than the easy babies. You know, they're just kind of hanging back, chilling out, and a little bit less intense in terms of both positive and negative reactions to new things. So they don't respond quite as positively as easy babies, but they also don't respond quite as negatively as difficult babies to new things. And they adapt slowly. So they will adapt eventually, but it definitely takes some time for them to adapt. So that's our first kind of understanding of temperament here. There are also, though, some more, so Thomas and Chess, they came up with their original ideas in the 1960s. So this was a long time ago. More recent developmental researchers look at three broad categories of temperament. So describe the individual differences that we see among children in terms of what they call negative emotionality, so negative emotions, which are essentially how much anger and irritability does the child show. There's positive emotionality as our second dimension here, where we look at how much pleasure does the child show, what is the child's overall activity level, and essentially kind of how happy, right? If a baby's smiling and laughing all the time, well, that's a lot of positive emotionality. And then our last one here, last dimension, is what's called effortful control. So effortful control includes things like attention. How long do you persist at a particular task? Do you stick with it, or do you stop? Do you give up? And then also, how good are you at controlling your own behavior? So developmentalists today, we typically focus on these three categories here of temperament, again, viewing temperament as the foundation for later adult personality. Okay, so temperament then, when we look at how well does a child's early temperament predict later temperament, and also potentially personality into adulthood, by about age 3, temperament is fairly stable, meaning that there is some room for change, but especially if you have an easy temperament as a child, the likelihood that you will continue to have that kind of easygoing adaptability throughout childhood and adulthood is increased. There is, however, that interplay between genetics and the environment. So that nature-nurture piece is still at play here. And that's where this concept of what's called goodness of fit comes in. So goodness of fit, this concept essentially states that the child will develop optimally when the environment matches the child's temperament. Okay, so when there is overlap between those things, this is typically the best situation for the child. So think, for example, if you had a child who had a very difficult temperament. So a child who does not like change, a child who shows kind of intense negative emotions to new things, and you are going to take that child to a new daycare. There are things that you could do to potentially alter the environment. So for example, you as the parent could tell the daycare staff, like, hey, this is how my child typically responds. This is what you need to know. So you can prep the daycare staff. You could also do things like take your child to the daycare, start introducing your child to the people who will be the child's caregivers when the kid's at daycare, so that your child has some ability to adapt to that very, very new situation, potentially lowering the likelihood that your child will have a very negative response to that. So that's the basic idea here with goodness of fit. So when the environment matches the child's temperament, the outcomes are typically the best for the developing child. All right, and we'll pick up with attachment in class. I will see you on Thursday. See you later.